If you're here for the first time, this is the place where I help designers build and scale their career with tips, suggestions, and tutorials. So if you're into it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Today in this episode, I'm going to teach you how to make this. In this, I will introduce a new technique today which justifies the effects in After Effects. And yes, I'm going to teach that to you today. And also while animating this, I will adopt a new way of organization essentially, which just makes your workflow a little easier. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. Here's a sample UI that I made in Figma. Now this UI looks beautiful. I must say I've done a good job. But let's be honest, it looks beautiful largely because of these beautiful covers. You know, those book covers which I have picked from different places, mostly from Pinterest. I haven't made them myself. I gathered them from various places and then just done a few touches to make them more book-like. So I don't own the credits of them. And this is also the reason why I will not be sharing this file with you, because I don't own the credits of these assets. Instead, I will share this one, which is nothing but the same UI with dummy boxes in place of the books, which are of the same size as the one which I have used in the demonstration. I highly recommend that you go ahead and substitute these with the covers of your choice. So here are the assets that I have isolated. This entire thing needs to be one single image, this horizontal scroll, which is going to happen. And this book is missing because this is the one which is going to expand. So I've kept it separate. This is big here and I will scale it down and just place it here before expanding it. And these are the different pages. These set, the one which are main page 1, 2, 3 and 4. These are the real pages where the page swipe will happen. That is, when the user swipes and goes to the next page. And these pages, which is the intro page, these are the pages which will flip while the book opens. The animation that we did in the beginning when the book opens, these intro ones are the ones which I'll be using for that. And I've also sized them in that way so that, it's a little easy for me to, go ahead from the smallest all the way to the big size. This is nothing but the full size. And the text which I've used are nothing but, they are dummy. I've mostly picked them up from the wiki page of my favorite actor. So let's go to After Effects and get started. Here I am in After Effects, and as a first step, I will import all the assets that I have just exported from Figma. And to do that, while in the project panel, I'll double click here. It'll open the file browser, and these are the image assets. I'll select all of them and click open. This will just bring them out here. And just for the sake of organization, I'll create a folder here because, you can create folders inside the project panel. I'll select all of them. Click and drag them over the small folder icon. You see the mouse icon has changed into a green plus, which indicates that there's an action associated to it. This creates a folder with all the contents inside. I will name it Image Assets. And I'll press enter. All my image assets are inside this folder right now. The next step is to create a composition. I'll click on New Composition. The size that I'll be using is 1080 by 2400, frame rate of 60, resolution doesn't quite matter because this is just a resolution of the preview that you're going to see while you work. It has got nothing to do with the quality or the final output that you're going to render. So I will leave it quarter because it's a little easier on my system. Duration, I'll keep it around 10 seconds. It's going to be lesser than that, but just for the sake of comfort, I will use 10 seconds for now. Of course, I'll also give it a name. Actually, I'll name it later because, we are trying to do in a slightly different way this time. You will know as we proceed. So I'll go ahead and click OK. So here's my comp one, which is created. Now, what we are going to do here is we are going to split the animation into 3 different parts and then assemble them inside one more composition. So this composition will be the first of the 3 that we are going to build. So I'll go ahead and name it 01 scroll and tap. This is a place where we will scroll the slider and then also tap on the book, the selected book, which expands and sits in the intermediate position, and this is where it ends. So to do that, I'll assemble the UI. First and the foremost, I need the home page. So I will click and drag the home page here. Next would be the slider. I will click on the slider, drag and bring it and place it above home. And then I will go and align it where, roughly where I think it should be. I think this is a nice position to start with. Next, I will drag and drop the book, which is nothing but the cover of the main book, which we are going to expand. And now we see that this is a big one. I mean, the reason I put a big asset because we are going to expand it later, and we do not want a low resolution widget or a low resolution asset to disturb the quality of our animation. So here it is. I'll go ahead and scale it so that's roughly the size of the remaining books out here. I will zoom in and just temporarily I will set the quality to full so that I see exactly what is happening here. I will bring it, place it somewhere here in the center, and I will go step by step. Now 39 sims seems a tad bigger than what I want, so I will just try maybe 38.7%. Oh, I think that's perfect. 38.7 exactly coincides with the rest of the books. So I'll just scale them and I will hide this layer for a while. I'll tell you why, because we are going to do a new thing here this time. Okay? But before that, this is the slider. Let's go ahead and give it some shadow because there was a light shadow which was there in the animation that you have seen. And to do that, I will select slider, go to effect, perspective, drop shadow. And the moment I do, you will see this new entry called drop shadow appearing in the effects and controls panel right here in this window. This is the same window where our project panel is also present, right? So it's a second tab on the same window. So here I am in drop shadow and my slider layer is selected. I'm going to give it some shadow here. For the first and foremost, the direction, I'll set it to 180 because I want a shadow which is firing at the bottom, somewhere at the bottom. And the distance, I'll set it to around 10 maybe. Let's try it out. Softness, let's try 60. 60. This is fine, but it looks a little too harsh. So instead of 50%, I will try an opacity of 30%. I think this looks good. 30%, 180 degree, 10 and 60. These are the values that I'm going to use for it. And now I will scroll it. And like I always say, it's not a great idea to start your animation from 0 seconds. So I will move this handle 30 frames ahead. To do that, I will press and hold Command and Shift and hit the keyboard right button 3 times. That moves the handle 30 frames ahead of 0. And now I will position keyframe this. So I'll select slider and to activate position, I'll hit P on the keyboard, click on the stopwatch to activate position, move 40 frames ahead, Command and Shift and the keyboard right button 4 times, add another keyframe here, and now I will move it to the left side till the time that hollow cavity appears. Great, perfect. Now when we go back and play, you see it is scrolled just like the way we want, except our book is missing here. So this is the time, while my handle is in the final position and the animation has happened, this is when I bring the book into the picture. So that is the main one. I go ahead and make it visible and I want it to be here. So I will place it somewhere here roughly, because it's not exactly the center. Now, this book should also scroll with the slider that you have seen. So the one way to do it is to add position keyframes to book and do it just like the way we have done it for the slider. But there is another way, and that is the concept of parent and child. Now, this is a new thing which I haven't introduced before. Let me do it now. So in After Effects, any layer can be made a child of another layer. And what happens when you make one layer a child of another is whatever happens to the parent kind of happens to the child as well. Of course, I say kind of because not everything is valid here. Only the spatial things, that is anything to do with position, scale, rotation and stuff like that gets transferred to the child as well. So what I will do is I will make this book a child of the slider. In other words, I'll have to select a parent for the book. And to do that, I will select book. And there is this small drop down here. If you would have seen it before, it says parent and link. This is nothing but a drop down where you see a list of all the other layers this one is grayed out because of course you cannot be a parent of your own. So I select a parent. Slider is what I will select. So now when I go back, you see it already started moving with the slider, right? So this is what happens to a child. It is something like what happens to us since we are in Earth. The Earth is rotating, so are we. We are rotating with the Earth, but we don't really feel it. We can move on our own, but that is not going to affect the Earth because we are a child of the Earth. So in the same way, when the slider moves, the book, which is a child of it, moves. But when we specifically move the book, it doesn't affect the parent, which is the slider. That's the advantage which we are going to use. But you might have seen one thing. Not every property, like I have said before, gets transferred to the child. For example, the shadow didn't. The slider has a shadow here, but our book doesn't. So all that we have to do is just add a shadow to this book as well. And to do that, we can either select the book, go to Effect, Perspective, and go to Drop Shadow once again. Or we can use a shortcut, and that is nothing but click on Slider. While in the Effect and Control slider, you will see this Drop Shadow. We select this and copy it. To do that, Command and C. Now I go to Book. It has nothing inside because we haven't added a shadow here. And I select the book and I do a Command V, which is nothing but paste. Now see, the same shadow with the exact same values that we have added for the sliders have started appearing on this book as well. This is exactly what we wanted. So if I go back and play, now this is pretty much what we need. Now, after this, when this slider thing has happened, I want this entire thing to pause for another 30 frames maybe. So I will press and hold Command and Shift on my keyboard and press the right keyboard button 3 times. This moves the handle 30 frames ahead. And now I want this book to scale and come in the center. To do that, I will have to animate scale. So I select book, press S on my keyboard, it reveals scale. I click on the stopwatch to add a keyframe, move 40 frames ahead, add one more keyframe, and while in the final stage, I wanted to scale it to around, let's see, 60%. Yep, I think 60% is good enough, but let's also change the position of it. So I want to add some position keyframes to it as well. And to do that, I will select book, press and hold Shift, and then hit P. So that it reveals position and at the same time doesn't hide scale, which I've already added. So I will click on the stopwatch here to add a keyframe of position. Go back to the initial position, add one more keyframe, and in the final stage, I will bring this to the center of the screen, somewhere here. And to make it more precise, I can use the Align tools. Center, center. So it's aligned horizontally as well as vertically. So this is exactly the position that I want. If you just see, this is how the book expands and sits in the middle of the screen. Now this is not done yet. If you remember the animation that I have shown before, there is also a background blur behind this book. Now background blur doesn't happen by default in After Effects as it happens in the designing tools like Figma and Sketch. So we need to do some jugaad here. Now if you're not from India, let me know in the comments if you know what jugaad means. That's a very Indian thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the jugaad, or the ingenious way of creating background blur inside After Effects. And to do that, first we'll need a black overlay. And to create that, we need a big rectangle. So I'll click on this rectangle. I'll hover over this rectangle tool and double click. What it does is it creates a rectangle which is exactly the size of the entire artboard. I will go and select a fill color of black and place this, which is nothing but the black overlay. I will rename it to black overlay and I'll place it under the book, but above slider and home. And now this needs to be animated, the opacity of this, right? While it is in this state, I don't want this black to be visible. So to add an opacity keyframe to it, I will select this layer, hit T on the keyboard, set an opacity keyframe, move to the final state, add one more keyframe, go back to the initial stage and set the opacity value to 0. So this is what is happening. Of course, the final stage doesn't need to be 100. I'll keep it around 80 maybe. Yep, I think 80 should be good. Let's just have a look at the next steps. And now to simulate the background blur, all that I need to do is just blur this home.png, which is nothing but the background layer. And to do that, I will select home, go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, Gaussian Blur. And just like shadow, when you do this, you will find a new entry called Gaussian Blur in the same effects control home. And you see something called blurriness here, which is set to 0 by default. When you increase this blurriness, it just blurs the layer. Actually, 6.3 is too small a value. Let me add 60. Yep. Now you see what has happened. So it actually blurs the layer behind, and that's exactly what we need to do. And we can animate blurriness as well, because you see a stopwatch here. And to animate the blurriness while my handle is in the final stage, I will add a keyframe. And to see that keyframe here, all that I need to do is just hit U on the keyboard once to collapse everything, once again to show only the keyframes which matter to me, the ones which are just added. And now you see there's something called Gaussian blur with blurriness. Since I added the keyframe there, it started appearing here as well. Now I'll move the handle to the initial position, add one more keyframe, and in the initial stage, I want the blurriness to be 0 because I don't want it to be blurred when it is in this stage. So only when it goes here, I want it to be blurred. Now you see one thing, it didn't blur the slider because the slider is not the same image. I've just added the blurriness to the home. So all that I need to do is add it to the slider as well. And I can copy paste just like I copy pasted the drop shadow properties. So for that, and when I copy and paste, it will also copy and paste these keyframes. But to do that, I'll have to ensure that the handle is in the first initial position. I go to home, select this Gaussian blur, do a Command C to copy it, come to slider and do a Command V. You see a second entry is created here along with drop shadow. It's the same panel where all the effects show up one after another. So my drop shadow was already there. Now we have a Gaussian blur with the same animation as well. Like I said, the keyframes get copied as well when you copy an effect. So this is what you needed. I'll set the quality to quarter so that it's easier on my system, and I'll quickly do a preview here. Of course, we haven't eased the keyframe, so it's very linear everything. Now along with this, we need to do one more thing, which is while this book comes and sits in an intermediate stage here, I want the background screen to scale down a bit. And to do that, it's simple again. I will select home, and to add a scale keyframe, I'll press and hold shift and then hit S on my keyboard so that it reveals scale and also doesn't hide this Gaussian blur. So I've added a keyframe here, go to the final stage, add one more keyframe here, and in the final stage, I will set the scale value to 96%. And the moment I did this, you'll see some black thing appearing. That's because, the composition is black in color, and when I reduce the size, it kind of starts revealing this. And the simple way to solve this is to add a white background behind, which we did not touch. To do that, I will create one more rectangle, select on the rectangle tool, double click once again so that it creates a rectangle exactly of the size of the composition. And this time, I want the color to be white. I select a white color. This is nothing but my white background. I rename it and I pull it all the way at the bottom under home. And I'm not going to do anything with this, so I'll just go ahead and hit lock so that it doesn't disturb me. I hit U on the keyboard. So that's it. Now you see the black thing that we were seeing is not there anymore. But here's one more thing. When my home is scaling, the slider isn't. If I just zoom it up for you, the slider isn't, because the slider is a different layer. And there are again two ways to do it. One thing is to go ahead and scale the slider separately, but we will do an easier thing, something that we learned just today. Remember? I will make this slider a child of the home. And to do that, I will go to slider and select a parent by, clicking on this drop down and select home as the parent. But there's another way to do it as well, which is nothing but this spiral. You see this spiral? This is a pick whip, and this you can click and drag and point towards any layer. You see, when I hover, it kind of outlines that layer, suggesting that this is where you can release. Let me do it once again for you. So I will select slider, which I want to be the child. I click and drag and leave it on home. What it does is it does the same thing. It essentially picks home in this drop down. Now the way of doing it would be, just go to the drop down and pick it. So there are two ways. Either you can click and drag because it's fun, or you can directly pick it up from this drop down. And the moment you do this, the slider becomes a child. And now you see, even the slider is scaling along with the background. Awesome, isn't it? Okay, so we are pretty much done in this stage. All that I need to do is just add some easing. I'll select the first set of keyframes. So I will select this, press and hold shift and select these as well because they are all the initial keyframes in their respective animation that we have made. And I will add an influence of 40% to the outgoing velocity. And to do that, I will use this plugin here, which I use, Motion 2. And this top slider that you see is the slider for outgoing velocity. I will set an influence of 40%. Now this is a paid plugin. If you do not have this, you can also do it manually by selecting the keyframe. And I'll just push it a little up so that you see what is happening. I'll select this keyframe, right click on it, keyframe velocity, and you see this is outgoing velocity, influence of 40. Same thing that we have just set here. So this doesn't do any special thing. It just makes your life easier by bringing some shortcuts outside instead of having to come to this window every single time. So it's one and same thing. So for the initial ones, I have set an influence of 40%. Similarly, for the final ones, I will select this, press and hold shift and also select these because these are also the final ones. I will give them a value of 100. Now this is for the lower slider, which is nothing but influence of the incoming velocity. I'll set that to 100 this time. Okay. Now if I go ahead and play it, I think this looks fine. Scroll, tap in the intermediate stage. Awesome. So this animation ends here and at a duration of around 2 minutes 20 seconds. Now let me show you what I was talking about when I said that we'll use a different workflow for organization. So you created the first one, which is scroll and tap. I'll go ahead and create a new composition. To do that, I will hit Command and N on the keyboard and the composition setting windows open. I'll give it a name of 00 main. And it'll have exactly the same configuration that we have had for the previous one. Width is 1080, height is 2460, and everything else can just remain same. I'll go ahead and hit OK. Now this main composition, it's open here. I will actually drag and bring it here. You see all the open compositions appear on the same window on different tabs, so that it's very easy for you to keep a track of. This main composition is the one in which we'll assemble the final composition or the final animation. And to do that, let me first drag and drop the first step, which we have just completed, scroll and tap. I will click on it, drag and position it here. So you see this is it's exactly the animation that we just created a while back. So this is the composition. And while it is here, it's just like a black box. All those keyframes that you've added are not here. They're inside this. Think of it like it's a group. So it's all grouped. It's one box right now. I will align it so that it's here. And if you remember, this animation ends at around 2 minutes 20 seconds. So I'll place the handle here while I'm here. And I go back to main and you will see the position of the handle is retained. This is also 2 minutes 20 seconds. Now I need to trim this composition here. Now I cannot hit N because if I hit N, it will trim the entire timeline. I don't want that. So I'll undo that. I just want to trim this because after this, I want to put the step 2 and the step 3 as well. So I will select this, press and hold Option and hit the square bracket close button on the keyboard. It cuts or it trims the composition in the position of the handle. Beyond this, there's nothing. Now this is a non-destructive method. So your composition isn't lost. It's just hidden, So, I can always drag it and, you can continue seeing what you had in your animation. Since there was nothing, it's kind of static. So I will just go ahead and undo, and I need it only for 2 minutes 20 seconds because beyond that, I don't have anything that I need. I will actually place other compositions to complete the animation. So that's fine. Now the next step is I will create the step 2, and for that I will make a copy of the first one. To do that, I will select this number 1 scroll and tap, hit Command D. Now I'll rename this to number 2 book open. Sorry. Book open. Now, right now, this is exactly same as that because I just copied. I will drag and drop this book open into the main, place it here. And if you remember, 2 minutes 20 seconds is where the previous one ended. I will make it start there. So the second one starts here. Now think of it like a relay race. You know, there are two individuals who are doing their own parts. This one has done its part and this is where it ends. It passes on the baton to this one. It passes on the baton to this one, and now this guy will have to continue it for the rest of the time till its time ends. All that we need to ensure is this junction is smooth, and for that we need to make sure that the last frame of this one is same as the first frame of this. That is the baton. And everything else, this doesn't need to know what this has done, this doesn't need to know what this has done. Now let us go and edit this one, number 2, which is book open. I will double click it. It opens. There's nothing but the copy of the first one that we made, right? But we do not need all these things at all. All that I care is stuff which happens after this. So I will bring this handle to around this point. I will hit U on the keyboard so that I see the keyframes that I had added. I will select all of them and delete. Now it starts with this. This is exactly what I wanted, right? The end of this and the start of this should be same. So I have the starting frame as the ending frame of the previous one. Now, like I said, this doesn't have any connection or any relation with the previous composition. So we can get away of a few things which are not needed. For example, if you remember, we made this a child of our slider. We don't need that anymore because the work of slider is done. I will remove that parenting. I'll make it none. And similarly, the slider was a child of home, but I will keep that because, you know, I'm going to scale the home in this step as well, or maybe in the next step. I'll figure that out. Now, we need to open this book, and the opening happens about this edge. We'll be using a 3D rotation feature here, but before that, we need to move the position of the anchor point, which is at the center right now, and if we were to open it from the edge, this needs to be at the edge. To do that, I will select this pan behind tool. This is my anchor point. I will hold it, click and hold it, and place it here at the edge. Or I have this plugin called Motion 2, and I have a shortcut for doing that. All I have to do is just click on this, and these are different positions of the anchor point. I will click on this, and it automatically places it at the left edge. So there I have it. Now I'll make it a 3D layer. To do that, I select the layer, and I click on this one. This is nothing but 3D layer, allows this layer to be manipulated in 3 dimensions. This is like a checkbox. So when I turn it on, this layer alone, it becomes a 3D layer. So what happens is it introduces a 3rd dimension. That's about it. Now we will rotate this about the y-axis so that, you know, it opens like a book. And as we know that it's not a good idea to start from 0 seconds, and since this one ended exactly at the place where the previous animation ended, so we would add a little bit of pause before we start the animation in this one. I'll add a pause of 30 frames. I'll press and hold Command and Shift on the keyboard and press the right keyboard button 3 times. While my handle is here, I will select on the book and add a rotation keyframe. To do that, I will hit R on the keyboard and add a Y rotation keyframe by clicking on the stopwatch. I'll move 30 frames ahead by pressing Command and Shift and hitting the keyboard right button 3 times. And I'll add one more keyframe here. Now in the final stage, I want the Y rotation to be 120 degrees. You see, I could have made it 180 as well. I mean, if you can say that the book is going to be flat once you open, but I thought I would just keep it 120 because it won't matter. You will see in a while. Now you see it's rotating just like a book should open, but it looks a little distorted. The reason being, After Effects has a camera by default. Now you must be wondering, where did this camera come from? I don't see one. Well, you always have a camera in After Effects, and whatever you're seeing here, you actually see through that camera. You don't need to know it every single time when you're working in 2 dimensions, but when you're working in 3 dimensions, the camera becomes a little important. And the way it works is the default camera in After Effects is a very wide angle camera, and that's why you see this distortion. This distortion can be compared to the distortion that you see when you're using a selfie camera of your phone and you hold it very close to your head. your head starts looking very big and distorted, right? The same thing is happening here. There's a simple fix for that. We just change the default camera. And to change the default camera, we just add one camera to the scene and that automatically changes the default one. Let's do that. I'll click on Layer, New, and Camera. And now that opens a camera setting window which may look scary, but you don't have to worry about anything that is happening here. All that you need to care is click on Preset and select 135mm, something which is not very wide angle. I'll go ahead and click OK. You see, the moment I did this, something called Camera 1 appears and the distortion that you had seen before is not there anymore. It started looking a lot more natural. Now you don't even have to worry about this camera at all. Just go ahead and put a lock there and forget that you ever used a camera or added a camera. You see, your rotation is much more natural right now. Awesome. Next, we need to create the flipping pages, the pages which flip when you open the book. And I will do a little more technique here as well. I will create those pages in a different composition and then bring that composition here. Nothing complicated, very simple. Let's just create a new composition for that. I'll hit Command and N on the keyboard to create a new composition. And all these things are going to remain same because everything is going to be a part of the same animation. So 1080, 2400, 60, 10 seconds. I go ahead and click OK. I will give it a name of, page flip or something like that, page flip. I'm not giving it a number because, it's not a part of this thing that we place on the 0.main, but it's an internal thing that I will use inside book open. Oh, I made a typo here. Open, yeah. That's why I just, didn't give it a number. So I open page flip and here it's an empty one. I'll have to import some images. I will import all these intro pages, intro base, all the way up to intro 6. I'll drag and bring them here. An intro base, it should be the last one, followed by 6, 5, 3, 4, 3, 2. And the first page will be nothing but the main page. Yeah, so I will bring this main page and put it here. If you remember what we saw on the Figma, the designs that I had made, these were my intro pages which flip while the book opens, the base one being the last, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And the first one is nothing but the main page, which is also the page for the next composition that we are going to make. So back to After Effects, I arranged them in the exact same order. Now we need to do the book flipping thing. This is the new thing that you had seen and you're going to learn. Now you must be wondering that has to be the toughest part of this animation, but you'll be surprised to know that is in fact the easiest part of this animation. And we have been talking After Effects all this while, and After Effects cannot be complete without effects. And that's exactly what we are going to do today. So I will select this and let me introduce you to this panel called Effects and Presets. When you click on this, you will see already a lot of effects which comes by default with After Effects. And I seriously urge you go and check out what these does and what kind of differences it makes to your animations. But for now, we will be using this thing called Page Turn. It's called CC Page Turn. And yes, we have a preset which does exactly this, turns page, and we are going to use exactly that one. So I will drag and drop it either here or on the layer panel here in my timeline. I will click and drag it on the first one. Not in all of them, only in the first one. The moment I do, you will see one CC page turn, it appears in the same effects and controls where I had my blur and shadow, everything else before. Right? So this is the default page. This is a default tab for any kind of effects that you add to your layers. Now, even here, the moment I do, you would see some sort of page turn has already happened. Not the way you wanted it, but something has happened. So you know that this is the right effect. Now, in this, the thing which is important for us right now is fold position. And it has certain, X and Y coordinates associated with that. So fold position is the one which is going to decide how your page will roll or curl. To see that, I will, the moment you add one effect, corresponding thing gets added here as well. So if I expand it and expand effects, you will see a CC page turn which appears. And along with this, we also get a new handle, which is this one. Not sure if you're able to see it well. This is my anchor point, and this is that page turn handle. So if you click and drag and move it, you will see this is how your page is going to turn. Okay. Of course, it's not perfect yet. We'll make some adjustments to make it look good, but we will keep it somewhere here right now, okay? Which is, the final stage. And I will animate this. To do that, I will animate this by clicking on the stopwatch here and adding a keyframe for fold position. And the moment I do that, a corresponding keyframe gets added here as well. To see that, I will hit U on the keyboard, and you see this is the keyframe that just got added. Fold position, the same thing that you see at the top. I will move 40 frames ahead. To do that, I'll press and hold Command Shift and press the right keyboard button 4 times. And I'll add one more keyframe here. Now in the initial stage, I move the handle back to initial. I will hold this handle. This is our page turn handle. If you don't see it, you can just click on this CC page turn here and you will start seeing this handle. I will hold this handle and bring it somewhere here. Somewhere here, so that this is how the page will turn. And I want it coming from slightly top so that it's an angled thing that I get to see. If you move the handle, you will see how it is appearing, So I can actually move it a little more up and just make sure that this thing doesn't show up because it folds. So make sure that you keep it out of the frame. This is your personal preference, how you want the page to appear. Okay, I think this looks good. But we'll make some adjustments, and to make those adjustments, I will keep it somewhere here at the center so that I see the folded page. One thing that I'm going to do for sure is to change the light direction. I will make it exactly opposite to what the default one is so that I get, a nice shadow here. Yeah, around 126 or 130 degrees is good enough. And for back page, it's taking the same. The main page one is by default. I don't want anything. I'll keep it none. So, technically, if you want something else to appear on the back page, you can always keep a layer here and choose that as the back page. But I don't want it because this is a digital app that we're making. And in a digital context, it doesn't make sense to have something at the back. So I'll go ahead and click none. The back opacity, which is nothing but the opacity of the page, it's set to 85% by default. I'll make it 90. I think that's good enough. And the paper color, it's a shade of yellow. I don't like this. And it's also not matching the page design that I have made in Figma. So I will just make it a slightly light shade of gray, slightly darker than white, somewhere here maybe. I'll go ahead and click OK. This looks much more natural. Now the last thing that we need to do is the fold radius. Now this looks like it's just a fold, where you just an origami sort of thing which you press. But I want it to roll and curl it. So I will change the default fold radius from 50 to around 300. You see, this is much more natural, looks more like a book. Now we are actually done with the page turn aspect. Now I just need to add a shadow because I want to make it a little more natural. To do that, you already know how to use a shadow. Just click on the main page one, go to Effect, Perspective, Drop Shadow. You see the drop shadow also appears. I said, remember, every effect appears in the same tab. Now for drop shadow, I think the angle is pretty much same. Just ensure that this light direction and the shadow are more or less the same. 135, I think it's good enough. I'll not bother making it 126 or something. But for distance, I will make it 60. And for softness, I will try around 200. Let's see. Okay. And you know what? I will make the opacity 60. So that, it's a nice dark shadow. You see how it happens on a book because the pages are so close that the shadows are really dark. So this gives it a much more natural and a real book sort of feel. Again, skeuomorphism at its best, right? Alright, now we are done with this page. Now we need to repeat these in the remaining pages as well. And to do that, it's very simple. We will just copy and paste. I will select the main page where I have added both these effects, drop shadow as well as page turn. I will select both of them. Do a Command C, copy. Select the second page, to a Command V, paste it. Next one, paste. Next, paste. Paste and paste. I did it to all the pages. And now if you want to see the keyframes, just press U on the keyboard once again and you will see all the keyframes that got added. Now if you just move the slider, you won't see any difference. The reason being all of them are happening at the same time. All that we need to do is just to introduce some offset here. That's it. So this is my base. Nothing is happening here. This is the one before that. I'll not do anything here. For all of the remaining, I will offset them. So I will select all of these, move all the keyframes towards the right by 2 frames. I press and hold Option and press the right keyboard button twice. Then I will select the remaining, not this one, move it by another twice. Then I will select these first 3, move it by another 2 frames, likewise 2 frames and 2 frames. So I've given it an offset of 2 frames from each other. Now if you go ahead and play, you see something is happening. You at least see the pages, but it's still not natural. All that I need to do is I will have to increase the spacing between them. So for that I will zoom in the timeline. To do that I'll hit plus on my keyboard and it just zooms in the keyframe so that I can see better. I will select this first 3, move it by another 2 frames. First 2, move it by another 3 frames. The first one, move it by 4 frames. Similarly for the ending keyframes as well, I will make them wider for the final few keyframes. So, I'll take the first 3, move them ahead by 2 frames, this one by another 2 frames, and the final one by another 2 frames. So let's go ahead and see how it looks. It looks fine, except that, it looks like there's an overlap. I don't want this effect to come, I want these to roll before. So the first 3 is where the problems are happening. So I will move them a little ahead. I'll move them a little more ahead and maybe move them a little closer. Right? Okay. The errors are still there, but what I'm assuming is the moment I ease these keyframes, this error should go away because the easing will take care of that. Let's see if my assumption is right. So I will select all these initial keyframes, go to Motion Plugin and give it an influence of 40% for the outgoing velocity. Similarly for the final keyframes, I will give them an influence of 100% for the incoming velocity. Now let's go and see if this has got fixed. Yes, it got fixed because the rate of movement changes. So that kind of fixes those overlapping issues that we had seen. In fact, I'm thinking of reducing the duration between them by maybe 5 frames. I'll select all the ending keyframes, move them towards the left by 5 frames by pressing Option and hitting the left keyboard button 5 times. Now let's see if it's any better. Yep, I think that's good enough. So we are done with the page flip. Now I'll close this. I'm done with this work. Now I go back to project. If I collapse everything, this was the same book open animation we were working on. Remember the previous composition? We had just done the 3D rotate for the cover. Now this is where I will bring my page flip animation, which is this. Now this, when I drag and drop and I place it right under book, this becomes like one unit. Without all the complicated things that you've done are inside this. So you don't have to worry about those complications in this so that you can completely concentrate on the things which matter. I will quickly align them here. And since my animation is starting at this, I will start this page flip also at around the same position. So for the page flip, we need a scale animation, obviously, because it's much bigger than the cover right now. I'll hit S on the keyboard, click on the stopwatch to add a scale keyframe, move the handle to the end, add one more scale keyframe, move it to the first one again, and I will make it smaller so that, this page just manages to go under the cover. So, let me try 60%. I think 60 should work. Let's see. Okay, it needs to be slightly smaller as well because, 60 is also a little too big. So let's try 57. Yes, I think 57 works perfectly. We do see some corners, but they will get fixed. I will show you how. Now we need to do 2 more things to this cover so that it looks natural. So one is, if you see, it rotates, but it stays here. It doesn't have to stay here. It needs to go out and it needs to grow in size as well. Because if the pages of a book are increasing in size, the cover will also have to increase, right? So I need to animate position and the scale. So I will select the book to add a position keyframe and not hide Y. I will press and hold Shift and hit P on the keyboard. Adds a position keyframe. Let me also go ahead and scale keyframe. I'll press and hold Shift and hit S on the keyboard and add a scale keyframe here. I'll move the handle to the final stage, add the corresponding position and scale keyframes. And in the final stage, I want this thing to be out of the frame. If I just zoom in a bit, I want it outside, just at the edge here, because this is where the book pages start, so the cover has to be somewhere here. And of course, the cover needs to be big. If the pages are so big, the cover needs to be at least this big, right? So ideally, we should make it of this height, but I think we don't need to do it. I will go and make it 120%. Not exactly the size of the pages, but we can do this because, by then the cover would already move out of the frame. So we wouldn't see the fact that it's not as big as the pages. So I think it'll just create the illusion. This looks fine. Let's quickly go ahead and ease them. I'll select the initial keyframes, add an influence of 40%, final keyframes, add an influence of 100%. So if I just go ahead and play it once, I think that looks fine. But I want to do one more thing. If you remember, the corners were showing up, and to do that, I will add an opacity keyframe to page flip. So I'll add an opacity keyframe. To do that, I will press and hold Shift and hit T on the keyboard. It reveals opacity. I add a keyframe here, move the handle to the end, add one more keyframe, and to the initial one, I will make the opacity to 0%. Now that automatically naturally takes care of the the corner thing that you're seeing, because it is 0 right now. And as it goes to the end, it is 100. But I don't want this to, animate all throughout this. In fact, I want this to show up even before. So I will select the final keyframe and move it to the left by 10 frames. To do that, I'll press and hold Option and Shift and hit the left keyboard button once. So, it becomes 100% little before itself, then the end. So that, I can see these pages animating towards the end a little more better. And I would also want this cover to open a tad little before the pages start to animate. So to do that, in the book, I will select these, the Y rotation, and move it to the left by 2 frames. To do that, I will press and hold Option and hit the keyboard left button 2 times. So it moves it by 2 frames. So if I just go ahead and play it, let me quickly set the easing values to the opacity as well. For initial, it's 40. For final, it's 100. And let me just go ahead and see a preview. Maybe, I think the pages should appear a little faster. So to do that, I'll go to page flip here. And if you remember, this is what we had made. I will select the final set of keyframes, these, and move them inside by another 5 frames. I press and hold Option and hit the left keyboard button 5 times. It just speeds up. It'll just speed up the thing a bit. Now, if I go to book open, let's see how it reacts. I think that looks fine. Cool. So this works. Let's go back to our main where we are assembling our animation. You see, if you play it from the beginning, in the first one, scroll, tap, and then the book opens and flips. You see? This junction is so seamless because you've ensured that the final frame of this and the initial frame of these are same. So, now we have the book appearing and it's opening as well. So, at around 4.5 seconds, maybe, I can trim it. So to do that, I will just select it, press and hold Option and hit the square bracket close that trims the composition. Now we need to do the final step, which is where the user flips through the pages. Where the user flips from one page to another, turning pages essentially. For that, I will create a new composition. I will close these because I'm done with them, right? I will create a new composition. I'll hit Command and N on the keyboard. Same dimensions once again, 1080, 2460 frames per second. And I will give it a name. This time I'll name it 03 page swipe. Yeah, let me call it page swipe. I'll hit OK. And this is where it is. I'll go to main and I'll actually position it. So I will drag this page swipe here. Sorry, it needs to be at the top. And I will align it so that it starts where this one ends. Now the ending frame of this one, book open, is simple, which is nothing but this chapter 1 page. So I'll have to start this page swipe with the same chapter 1 page. Let's get working. So in page swipe, I'll go to image assets and insert all these main pages, main page 1, 2, 3 and 4. I will drag them and bring them here. So this is my first page, chapter 1, page 2, page 3 and page 4. Now we need to give the same shadow and page turn that we did in the previous one, that is in page flip, to this as well. And I can simply copy and paste. So I will go to page flip. I'll select any one of them. Let me select the first one, main page 1. I will go to Effect Control. I will select both Drop Shadow and Page Turn, and I'll copy them. Command C. Now I'll come to Page Swipe, the new one which I just created. Go to the main page 1 once again and paste it by Command V. Now actually I'm done with this. I don't need this. So in Page Swipe, if I hit U, you will see it just added the same keyframes that were added before. But the only thing is, I want it reversed this time. It's not that the book is, opening. I want it to make it look like the user is turning pages. So all that I'll have to do is just swap this keyframes. I'll make it, bring it to the end and bring it to the beginning. So at 0, this is what it is. And then maybe 40 frames ahead, this is what I have. Okay, so this looks like a page turn. But here I will introduce a little more imperfection. Because previously when that opened, it's like a very robotic sort of page flip because the app is doing it. So we'll make it a little imperfect to mimic the real user interaction. To do that, first of all, I will remove all these easings. To do that, I will select these keyframes, press and hold Command and click. That will remove any kind of easing and make them linear again. Now, we will increase the spacing between them, just so that we get some space to work. Now, while at 0, I will move the handle by around 20 frames maybe. Command Shift and the right keyboard button twice. Now in this, I want to add one more keyframe for fold. To do that, I can either click here, that will add one keyframe, or I can simply change the position of this fold position and it'll automatically add a keyframe. Let's try that one. So I will hit the CC page turn here. I'll click on it so that I start seeing the handle. So in the middle here, I want it to be something like this. Think of how you would flip through a book you are reading, right? So maybe like this. I don't want to be a straight swipe, so I'll bring some drama here. I'll move it by another 20 frames, Command Shift and move it by 20 frames. And here, I will paste the same keyframe. So I'll do a Command C and Command V, so that this essentially becomes a pause. But this pause is also very unnatural. No human can ever hold something which is completely immovable. So I'll add a little bit of difference in the latter one, which is, maybe a little bit, just this much. So that it seems like, okay, the user was turning it, then something caught his or her attention, and then they held it for some time, but then you can't hold it perfectly. So there's a bit of movement, and then finally the page is turned. I'm just trying to mimic how a user would actually do it. Feel free to try out your own ways. This is just what I think somebody might be doing. And in this case, since it's a user interaction, I would also change the easing values a little bit. So for the initial one, I will give it an outgoing influence of 100%. Yes, 100 for the initial this time, because I want it to start really slow and then slowly gain the momentum. So what I might want to do is increase this spacing. So I will just select these, press and hold Shift and Option and move it to the right by 10. I think 10 frames should be fine. And I'll also reduce this a bit. I'll move it inside by another 10 so that it's something like this. Yep, I think that looks fine. Maybe I can increase it a little more. Shift and Option and press it right by another. Yeah, I think that looks natural. That looks like a natural movement that can happen. And we don't have to ease these. I will just keep them that same way. The linear kind of works because it just moves out of the frame. Actually, instead of making it 100, maybe I will try around 80. Let's see how it looks. Yeah, I think 80 is better. It's much smoother. Perfect. Now, we need to replicate these for the other two pages as well. So I'll select main page 1, drop shadow, page control, do a Command C, go to page 2, paste it, go to page 3, paste it. Page 4 doesn't need it because it's just a static thing which just remains there as a background. Now if I hit U on the keyboard, you will see all the keyframes are here. Now remember, we are trying to make things natural. And in natural, when we are making something natural, things don't repeat. So the errors that we added here, errors in interaction or rather imperfections, doesn't have to repeat because imperfections do not repeat in a certain fashion, right? So let me add a pause between these two I move 30 frames ahead and move this somewhere here. And I will remove these internal keyframes that I had added for the first one. The first one can remain that way. The second and the third, I don't really need that. So I will just delete them. And for that, I will also reduce the space or duration between them. Maybe I will give them around 50 frames. Command Shift. I press the right button 5 times and I move these keyframes here. And then since I want them to happen one after another, I'll also add some pause between them, maybe another 30 frames. And I will move this here. Now if I go ahead and play them. Okay, I think that's fine. Or maybe, I just, maybe I'll slow this one down a bit because I'm trying to introduce imperfections, if you remember. Yes, yes. The last one is slightly faster. I think that is great. That's awesome. We are done. I go back to the 0.main. So here I've already added. So if you go ahead and play, swipe, tap, book opens, first page, second page, third page. We are done actually. So I'll move the handle to around 9 seconds and trim the entire composition. Of course, I don't have to separately trim this one because this is where my animation ends. I can trim it directly here, the entire timeline. And to do that, I'll hit N on the keyboard and it trims the entire thing. Now, all that you need to do is add some swipe marks and tap marks, which will, bring the life out of the entire animation. If you don't know how to do that, I will leave a link of a video in the description and also in the info button towards the top right where I have discussed in detail as to how to create those tap marks. It's very simple. I would suggest you go and try that out. So that's it. If you like this video, like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so that you get notified every time I upload a new video. If you upload this animation anywhere in social media, don't forget to tag me. The handles are right there in the description. This is Sapta. See you guys in the next one.